Now I'd like to turn it over to Kathleen Brennan-Hunter, our Deputy Director of Conservation and Policy, who will share a few words of welcome and context.
Thank you, Jason. Oh, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We greatly appreciate your presence today for this program and all that you do to support conservation. And as we reflect on how to better steward the places that we call home, we wanted to start today with a land acknowledgement. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world. Those have contributed hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led us to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life. And some have lived on this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage or difference and difference. So we begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We acknowledge the many territories from which we join this call today as ancestral homelands of Native people. I'm joining today from Portland, and the metro area includes traditional lands of the Multnomah, the Cathlamet, Clackamas, Cowlitz bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. Today, people from these bands have become part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians, as well as the Chinook Nation and the Cowlitz Nation in Washington State. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present. We're also sharing a link to a map in the chat. You can use that link to look up your location. And if you feel comfortable, please tell us where you're joining from today and recognize the traditional stewards of that place in the chat. All around the world, Indigenous people and local communities have long protected their lands and waters in reciprocity with nature, often guided by strong connections with place and culture. These communities manage at least a quarter of the world's lands and vast stretches of freshwater and marine habitats. Despite a history of colonialism, forced resettlement, strong external development pressure, and exclusion from natural resource decisions, their stewardship and management often achieves greater conservation results and sustains tremendous biodiversity, more so than government protected areas. When we are invited to collaborate, the Nature Conservancy works in partnership with Indigenous people, local communities to strengthen their role in stewarding the land and waters upon which all life depends. We believe this is one of the most impactful and enduring actions we can take to protect critical places, to address climate change, and to create a future where people and nature thrive. Thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you, Kathleen. Now, let's turn to our presentation. Our featured speaker today is Gway Kirchner. But first, we're going to hear from Gina Carter, who will give a brief introduction to our Coast and Marine program. Gina joined the Nature Conservancy in 2007, and for the last decade has served as the Oregon chapter's Marine and Coast Director. Prior to joining the Conservancy, she worked on ocean policy, holding positions at the United States Senate, Rhode Island State Senate, National Governors Association, and the Coastal States Organization. Gina, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Jason. And thank you to everyone for joining us today on this Zoom. Thank you for that slide. Within Oregon's Coast and Marine program, we've taken a holistic approach to our work, and we recognize the interconnectedness of the coast, from the climate to the forested mountains, the rivers, down through our estuaries and ocean, and of course, the people that reside and visit the coast are all connected. I sketched this little drawing. You can tell I have amazing art skills. I sketched this little picture just to show that where our strategies touch down on the coast and how they're all linked in this special place. In these priority areas, we're deploying a range of projects, including land acquisition, restoration projects, supporting marine reserves, and science on topics such as ocean acidification and kelp beds, thoughtful energy siting, policy work, and robust partnerships with landowners. I'd love to share this full body of work with you, but for today, we're going to focus specifically on TNC's fisheries work. To start any ocean presentation, it's important to note that the ocean provides many critical services that sustain us. For example, the air we breathe, 50% of it comes from the ocean. We get to enjoy recreation on the coast, medicines, food, and of course, it's a critical component of our economy. And while there are some factors occurring within the ocean that are out of our control, such as the strength and the speed of ocean currents, there are many ways that we can study, adapt, and influence positive changes in the ocean. And one of those pathways where we can make a positive impact is fisheries. A huge component of ocean health are the fish, the role they play in the food web, and their relationship to other species and habitat. Removing fish in a sustainable manner helps us accomplish 4 outcomes. Fish can remain a vital component of the ecosystem. Non-fish species such as birds, whales, and sharks are minimally impacted. Habitats are protected and also minimally impacted. And fishermen and the fishing communities remain a vital component of our coastal communities, living wage jobs, and feeding people a healthy source of protein. To continue to support these benefits into the future, TNC has invested in fisheries management. TNC has many projects happening in the United States and around the globe. Here in Oregon, we launched our fisheries program in 2015, and we're delighted to hire Gway and have her expertise on board. Gway started her career walking the docks as a fish sampler and monitoring salmon smolt production. She served on the Pacific Fishery Management Council and as a manager of the Marine Fishery Management Section for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, where she provided regulatory oversight on a wide range of sport and commercial fisheries. Now we're grateful that she brings her talents to TNC to help us implement our fisheries work and to ensure that innovative solutions are deployed here in Oregon. We're going to show you a quick video, and then when we come back, you'll get to hear from Gway. We hope you enjoy the video.
The ocean, it is the largest wild space left on this planet. You just can't see it. We can't walk on it or breathe in it. For the longest time, people thought it's unending. The resource is unending. We just take all we want from the ocean. Now we've got climate change facing us down.
I really firmly believe that we have the best managed fisheries in the world right here in Oregon. From the customer experience standpoint, I can imagine how difficult it is to wade through all of the information that's out there about fisheries and ocean health. So I just want people to feel good about the choices they make, and we try to make that easy for them here. Even though we can feel good about certain decisions that we're making today locally, we can't turn a blind eye to the effects are of the whole system and how the choices that we make affect others up and down the chain as well.
I think of a fishery as the combination of a species in the ocean, the men and women who go out to sea to bring that food to shore, the community that they live in, and the supply chain that delivers whatever it is to your plate. What's an unsustainable fishery? It really means catching too many fish, catching the wrong kind of fish, and destroying the habitat that makes fish even possible. We're looking at all of that through a new lens, climate change, and the impacts of climate on fisheries are unambiguous and real.
I've probably spent between 5,000 and 6,000 days on the ocean. It's a lot of observation, and if you're not a good observer, you're not going to be a good fisherman. As the species responsible for the climate change problem, we have the capability to respond to it. I've seen more and more fishermen move away from thinking about their career to seeing that it has to be the long-term view, and to tie ourselves to science more than ever and save wild fishing and so much else.
That deep knowledge that's held within fishing communities can be unleashed to develop the 21st century solutions that we're going to need to have a world where people and nature thrive in the face of climate change.
We have the space to do it. And if we don't use that space, our ocean ecosystems will suffer, as will the people that depend on them.
When I'm out there fishing, especially when we're pulling these traps, especially when we make a connection, sometimes the fishing is so good, and when we do, it's like I feel like I understand how I fit into this world.
Some of the work that we've been doing to really look at what our ocean ecosystem will look like in 2040 has energized work on the East Coast to prepare their fisheries for climate change. And that, I think, is really exciting.
Despite the immense challenges that we face with climate change, I still wake up optimistic because our experience shows that when we use the ocean more carefully, the ocean will take care of us.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Again, my name is Gway Kirchner, and today I'm going to talk with you about the work that we're doing to prepare our important fisheries for climate change. But before I really get into my presentation, I wanted to share a bit about fishery management in general. You heard a good definition of what a fishery is from Jay Odell in that wonderful video that we just saw, who does work on fisheries for the Nature Conservancy on the East Coast and is a great collaborator with us here in Oregon. And that definition was a combination of species in the ocean, the men and women who go out to sea to bring that food to shore, the community that they live in, and the supply chain that delivers that food to your plate. And that definition is really people-oriented. And it's important to note that fishery conservation is unlike TNC's traditional work. It is not possible to buy an acre of ocean to preserve it or restore it, and fish don't really listen well when you tell them where to go and when to be caught. You can't put fences up to keep creatures in or out of an area. So conservation of our important marine ecosystems is really achieved by changing our human behavior. Fishery managers can tell fishermen where to fish and where not to fish, how to fish, and how many fish to catch. And there are consequences for not adhering to regulations and policies. So essentially, management of fisheries is really management of the people who participate in those fisheries. So today, I'm going to tell you three big things in this presentation. The first is that climate change is happening right now, today, and here in Oregon. Second, through careful planning and being willing to do things a little bit differently, we can adapt and we can continue to have great fisheries. Third, there is a whole lot more that we need to do to ensure that those adaptations will work. In 2019, NOAA Fisheries, the federal agency responsible for fishery oversight and governance nationwide, deemed West Coast fisheries as the comeback fisheries of the century. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, new research and understanding showed that several species and populations were overfished, meaning that there were not enough fish being produced to sustain the population, given how many fish were being caught in fisheries. Through tools such as the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act, which is federal legislation that guides how fisheries are managed in the US, using conservative fishing regulations that reduce the potential for a species to be harvested so much that it becomes unable to persist, and fisheries policies that make fishermen directly responsible for their harvest, we were able to reverse that downhill trend. And today, most fisheries here in Oregon and elsewhere on the West Coast are in pretty good shape. However, we are just starting to experience impacts from climate change, and without taking action now, we risk losing our good fisheries. And climate change is here in Oregon. You heard that in the words of Bob Etter. And Bob is a longtime commercial fisherman based here in Newport, Oregon, who is seeing the effects of climate change in his work on the ocean. I can also tell you firsthand that climate change is impacting us right now today. These are my girls fishing for winter steelhead a few years ago on the Sluts River on the central Oregon coast. They were not able to put this boat out for winter steelhead this year because the river was too low and already at summer flows in March. That is climate change. This graphic was developed through a federal planning process that the Nature Conservancy is leading, looking at what the driving forces are for ecological, economic, and social change in the next 20 years here on the West Coast. You can see that there is a potential for a multitude of changes coming to Oregon's coastal communities and fisheries. And we are already seeing changes from some of these drivers. We are currently experiencing areas of acidic water in the ocean that strips carbon from the shells of animals such as oysters, and areas with low oxygen known as hypoxia, in which all animals that can't move out of the area die. Since 2014, we have had areas of unprecedented and persistent warm water, also known as marine heat waves, pictured on the right here, that have caused many surprising and impactful changes. Due to those marine heat waves, we have experienced new species showing up on our coast, such as the pyrosomes, also known as sea pickles, shown here on the lower left, and widespread algal blooms resulting in high levels of biotoxins that can be deadly to humans, marine mammals, and birds. We are experiencing species that drive some of our most, we are expecting species that drive some of our most important fisheries to move north or to deeper waters to escape warmer water temperatures, and potentially moving out of the reach of fishermen. And that would permanently change our ocean ecosystem. For climate change on the West Coast, the question is that if we will see impacts, or even when we will see impacts. We're experiencing those right now today. So here we are back at those three big things that I hope that you take away from this presentation. I just gave you some information about climate change and how it's happening. And really, Bob Etter said it most eloquently in that video that we watched. But there is hope. And now I'm going to give you one example of how we are working to adapt our fisheries to ensure a healthy ocean ecosystem into the future. So I'm going to share with you a project that we have been part of since 2017, working with fishermen and researchers to determine ways to reduce the risk of entangled, threatened, and endangered humpback whales in fishing gear. What is whale entanglement? So you can see in this picture the rope lines that connect fishing gear, likely a pot of some kind, to the buoys at the surface that allow fishermen to see where that gear is located and bring it onto the vessel. And those lines are wrapped around the whale's tail and either coming out of the mouth or wrapped around a fin. The reason whales interact with gear in this way is still a bit unknown. Whether they accidentally pick up the gear while swimming by or intentionally interacting with the gear. And they can pull this gear for quite some ways. Whales entangled off Oregon have been found in Mexico with the gear still on them. And that can result in great damage to the whale or even death to the whale. 7 species of these charismatic marine mammals have been confirmed entangled in fishing gear on the West Coast since 1982. And those are the 7 species that are shown here. Some of you may be wondering where the dolphin is. And while we call the orca a whale, it is really in the family of dolphins. Of the nearly 430 confirmed whale entanglement records from 1982 to 2017, the two most common species reported entangled were gray whales, which comprised 48% of the confirmed reports, and humpback whales, which accounted for 38% of the confirmed reports. 25 of the nearly 430 confirmed reports, or 6%, have originated from Oregon, with the majority of confirmed whale entanglement reports having originated from California. And California comprises about 85% of whale entanglements, and 7% from Washington. And while California has the bulk of the confirmed whale entanglements, this is a West Coast issue, and every state has a responsibility to do their part to reduce the risk of whale entanglements. This is a chart of the confirmed whale entanglement report since 2000. It is important to note the use of the word confirmed. There are many reports of whale entanglement received each year. Not all reports can be verified. There is a set criteria for the determination of a confirmed report, including the addition of photos of the whale with gear, the identification of the whale directly by NOAA Fisheries staff or other professionals, and multiple detailed reports of the same whale. This is the most reliable data to use to determine the level of annual whale entanglement. And you can see from this chart of the last 21 years that prior to 2014, there were about 10 confirmed entanglements a year. Some years lower, some years higher, but it really averaged right around 10. Beginning in 2014 and really in 2015, the number of entanglements skyrocketed and stayed high for a good number of years. During this time, we also began experiencing the effects of changes in our ocean. A very large marine heat wave, which we affectionately termed the warm blob, developed in the Eastern Pacific. This was a large area of warmer than normal water that hung around for well over a year. This resulted in unprecedented closures for fisheries, for Dungeness crab, razor clams, and mussels due to high concentrations of domoic acid, which is a substance toxic to humans and results from higher ocean temperatures. Commercial Dungeness crab fisheries in California remained closed until April 2015. They generally opened December 1st, even in some areas in California, November of the previous year. And they opened during the height of the spring migration of humpback whales, who, due to warmer than usual waters, were feeding near shore on anchovy. This resulted in over 100,000 crab pots being deployed in the same location as the feeding humpback whales, and in nearly 5 times the number of confirmed whale entanglements than had ever been seen before. So you can see here that humpback whales migrate great distances between wintering areas in the south and feeding areas in the north, and each point is an individual whale. There's 873 individual whales in this graphic. And the lines represent multiple sightings of a single whale. Whales from multiple stocks can congregate in the same location. The Central America population, noted by the red star, is currently listed as endangered through the Endangered Species Act, and the Mexico population, noted by the orange star, is threatened. Additionally, the Washington, Oregon, California population, showed with the yellow star, is identified as depleted under the Marine Mammal Act, meaning the population is not as healthy as we would like, but it's not at the level that warrants a threatened or endangered listing. You can see that individuals from all of these populations mingle off of our coast, along with individuals from healthy populations in Hawaii and other areas. And it really isn't possible for fishermen to know which whales are in the immediate vicinity of their gear when they are fishing. Entanglements can lead to death of the whale, impacting the recovery of these populations. Following the high number of entanglements, Oregon's crab fishing industry requested the formation of a multidiscipline working group to develop recommendations on ways to reduce the risk of whale entanglements in Oregon waters. This group was composed of fishermen, processors, gear distributors, researchers, and conservation organizations such as the Nature Conservancy. And I am actually a member of that group. We developed a directive of best fishing practices for the industry and recommendations for regulatory changes to the fishery, such as limiting crab gear in the water during the summer months when the whales are most prevalent here, and in the locations that can be fished. And improved gear marking so we can identify what fishery entangled gear is from. These changes are currently being implemented by the state of Oregon, and similar groups are working in California and Washington, with great strides being made, particularly in California. Together, we are addressing this coast-wide issue. So here we are back to the chart of confirmed entanglements for the last 21 years. You can see that the number of entanglements has decreased, likely due to changes to fishery management coastwide, but we can't take all of that credit. There has been an improvement in ocean conditions in the past few years as well. This is a good thing, but these big swings in ocean conditions are actually one of the most certain impacts of climate change on the West Coast. So even this improvement is an indication that our climate is changing. The work we're doing here on the West Coast and in Oregon has great applicability throughout the world. The map shown here is an accounting of humpback whales, with the pink circles showing endangered populations. Our planning can inform the reduction of entanglement risk in these populations as well as our own. Additionally, we have shared knowledge and learning with those on the East Coast who have been working to reduce entanglement risk to right whales for several decades. And the process we developed could be applied to other marine species, such as monk seals in Hawaii, who are being impacted by a different type of fishing gear. So here we are, back to my three big things. I promise this is the last time you will see this slide, because I have told you about how climate change is happening in the marine environment right here in Oregon, and shared an example of how we are adapting to fisheries to reduce the impacts of climate change to both the ecosystem and the humans who depend on them, which is a really good step. But there is more that we need to do. We need to be creative and innovative in the gear and methods used to catch fish in the future. We need to find ways to ensure that we are only catching the fish that we intend to, and not the fish in mammals and reptiles and birds that we don't want to catch. We need to be able to make changes to fisheries quickly and based on the highest quality and most recent information we have, and proactively identify what those changes would be. And to make those changes, we need to bring our fishery data collection into the 21st century. Data is still being collected using pen and triplicate carbon copy forms and hand entered into computer databases. To adapt to climate change, we need to have high quality and error-free fishery data in near real time. And we have the technology to be able to do so. We are working with fishermen, the state of Oregon, and others to develop mobile tools that will allow fishing location and harvest information to be collected and submitted in real time. And this is just the beginning of modernizing West Coast data collection. We also need to strengthen our state-managed fisheries, such as Dungeness crab, hagfish, which is that interesting looking creature on the bottom left, and pink shrimp. We are working with fishermen and the state of Oregon to ensure these species and others have the needed policies in place, such as transparent fishery management plans and a good understanding of the impacts of climate change on the species and associated fisheries. And we are doing more for those like this young lady, who is our future generation. This again is my oldest daughter. She's fishing for steelhead, this time on the Alsea River, and learning that species of plants and animals, this happens to be a cutthroat trout, can easily and quickly disappear no matter how tight a hold you think you might have on them. But with new tools and adaptive strategies, we can overcome these challenges presented to us by climate change. And we have the time available to us to be able to develop those tools and strategies right now today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Gway. That was great. At this time, we'd like to ask some questions from our guests. And if you have a question for Gway or Gina, you can type it in the chat and my colleague Megan Fairbank will read them out loud. As a reminder, if you hover your mouse or your cursor over the bottom of your Zoom window, you'll see a number of little icons pop up, and near the middle, there's a gray speech bubble with the word chat below it. And if you're using your phone, you might have to tap the screen and you'll get the options that pop up, and you can tap the three little dots at the bottom that are labeled more and then select chat. Most of you probably can find chat by now, but just in case, that's how you do it. So while we're getting the questions together, I have one I'd like to ask. What is one thing we can all do to help address the challenges that you just outlined, Gway?
So I think that the one thing that everybody can do is be really informed on where the fish that you're buying comes from, and ask questions and feel good about eating West Coast and Oregon harvested fish. That can go a long ways to helping to improve fisheries by keeping fish here, by creating our domestic markets, and by every time a fish is sold here in Oregon, funding goes into research and fishery management, which is really helpful in moving forward with doing what we need to do to prepare fisheries for climate change.
Gina, did you want to answer that question as well?
I think Gway answered it really well, honestly. I guess the only other thing I would add is just a thought exercise for folks, is just also thinking, when we think about fisheries, we so often think of the blue part, the marine part, but there's such a connection with so many of these fisheries also using estuaries and nearshore habitats. So thinking about them through their whole life cycle and actions that we can take on land also help our marine fish friends. About 80% of marine fish use estuaries, for example, as part of their life cycle. So when you're recreating at the beach and pack up your trash, or think about things you're doing locally on land, because it also affects our marine fisheries.
Okay. Megan, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we have one to start. Are there any guesses, Gway, this one's for you. Are there any guesses as to which southern commercial fisheries might become more common in Oregon in the future?
Yes, thank you. So we know that market squid is already becoming more prevalent in Oregon waters. And if you ever had calamari, you've most likely had market squid. It's California's largest state managed fishery and happens primarily in Southern California. And market squid have been moving north in catchable populations, and we have a budding fishery here off of Oregon. Vessels have put in hundreds of thousands of dollars to retrofit themselves to be able to catch market squid, and the state of Oregon is now working on a plan for how they're going to manage market squid, because it's becoming so much more common here in in Oregon.
Great, thanks, Gway. Kind of related to that, which commercial fishing methods or gear do you see becoming more or less common in the future? You answered a little bit there, but if you have more thoughts.
Yeah, so I think that it's hard to tell with that one, kind of depending on how, we don't exactly know how fish species are going to move in and out. I do know with the market squid moving in, maybe if we get a rebound in some of the little silverfish fisheries, such as sardines, anchovies, some more southern species like thread herring moving up north, then I would see seine fisheries really starting to build. And I think fisheries that have gotten a little tougher for folks are probably some of our salmon fisheries that have been really gone from, good to not so good through the years. But those fisheries are very highly managed, and even for a fishery like salmon that might seem like it's not so good, it's so highly managed, catching it in the ocean as well as in the streams, that we are able to provide fisheries and ensure that we get enough salmon back to streams to spawn.
Great, thanks. The next question starts with a comment from Laura. I know how challenging it is working with the fishing fleet on these and any fishing issues. It's difficult to get people together, much less to agree on what is needed. Do you think that community work in fisheries is getting easier or more difficult as the challenges are mounting?
I actually think that working with fisheries and communities is getting a little bit easier, in that we maybe still don't all agree, but we're getting more people coming to the table to try to solve problems that maybe wouldn't have in the past saw a need to come to the table. And a lot of that is really looking at the impacts that we've had from climate change, indigenous crab and other fisheries. Folks are really wanting to be proactive in solving some of the issues. We also are able to have that the time to be proactive, rather than always feeling like we're in the defensive mode and responding, which makes it a lot easier to collaborate with folks because we're not at a crisis moment.
Excellent. The next question was about the warm blob. Now, you indicated that conditions are improving with whale entanglement. What is the status of the warm blob? Is it gone? Is it smaller?
So the first warm blob that we saw did dissipate, and we've had additional marine heat waves come up almost every year that didn't maybe persist quite as long as the first one, and maybe are configured a little bit differently. So it seems like marine heat waves are becoming more prevalent, but in these last couple of years, not as impactful as the longer spread out, larger marine blob has been.
Great, thanks, Gway. How receptive is the fishing community to updating the catch logs to a real-time digital format? Are there any challenges that you did not anticipate?
So this there is surprisingly some really good support for moving to electronic data collection methods, and especially because it will be easier for fishermen to be able to record that information as well. So which is good for fishermen. When they're out fishing, they're trying to write down with pen and paper, and sometimes it's wet and might be a little bit slimy, and they're trying to drive boats and pull gear and such and write down. So it can be really challenging for fishermen versus if they have, you know, a tablet or something like that they can easily just poke a button. Will make it much simpler for them. We do still have fishermen, such as any part of our population that is not as electronically savvy as especially our younger fishermen that are coming in. And so I don't see that we would immediately be able to go to 100% electronic data collection, because we have folks out there still with, you know, flip phones and have small operations that they're not using a computer. So we'll take a little bit of time to get them there. But for the bulk of our fishery, those folks are, you know, very computer, big computer users. They have multiple sensors on their boat that they're running that they're used to already. So I think it will be a good transition.
Great, thank you. How might the development of renewable energy affect fisheries or whales off our coast? Is TNC looking at that?
So I think that would be a good one for Gina to help answer there as well. I know for fisheries, there you know, maybe some impact in space use and that sort of thing. So that's all part of the planning process. But I think I'd like to phone Gina in to help answer that question.
Yeah, no problem, Gway. So yeah, offshore of Oregon, we have some incredible wave and wind resources. And there's a lot of attention and enthusiasm right now for particularly looking at developing the wind resource. And on the South Coast in particular, we have some of the best winds of any place in the world. So it's very attractive for developers. But you know, our ocean is busy. There's lots of other users. In addition to fisheries, there are migratory species, there are tons of vessel traffic, there's other uses happening out there. And so there requires a robust planning process to figure out how best to situate renewable energy in the midst of all those other uses. So there is actually a planning process that has begun. It began in October of 2020 to look at the Oregon coast from north to south, the whole coast, and decide where best to potentially place this future energy. And that work is occurring through an MOU with the state and federal government. And under our work plan that we're going to be doing for the next short term here, we are going to be investigating what role TNC can play in that process and how we can influence it or be an advocate within that process. So yeah, so that, I hope that answered the original question, but there's definitely an opportunity for offshore energy. And then, like I said, there'll be many stakeholders at the table trying to help figure out where to place that.
Great, thank you, Gina and Gway. The next question is, you mentioned we have a chance to be proactive in fisheries. Gway, this one's back to you. Can you give an example of your work in that area or actions that are happening?
Sure. So we have a couple of projects here based on the West Coast as well as in Oregon to do some proactive planning for fisheries and using scenario planning, which is a methodology, a planning methodology developed and used by oil companies in Wall Street and the Park Service and others, and using that methodology to develop scenarios for federally managed species, so that all of our ground fish like lingcod and rockfish and black cod and those types of species, our salmon here on the West Coast, coastal pelagic species that are the little creatures like market squid and sardines and anchovies, and highly migratory species such as albacore tuna and some of our sharks. And so that's in the federal side. We're using the same methodology here in the state with our Dungeness crab fisheries. And in both planning processes, we've developed scenarios of what our ocean ecosystem as well as our coastal communities may look like in 2040, so in 20 years. And then really brainstormed on what would those different scenarios, some are good scenarios, some are some pretty dire scenarios. What would that mean to coastal communities and fishermen in conducting their business? And what would that mean to conservation, and what research and data is needed to be able to really start putting in some measures that might address all of the scenarios. So maybe things like climate, some climate components in how we set harvest guidelines on how many fish you can catch. And then other things that we might want to be able to quickly put in place in the future if we see we're going towards a particular scenario. So things like, you know, innovative fishing methods that maybe we don't need right now, but we may need in 10 or 15 years.
Great, thank you, Gway. Super interesting stuff that you're doing. This one's coming a little bit more back to here and now. You mentioned general ideas about eating sustainable seafood. Are there specific best choices for us in Oregon?
So I feel good about anything that is harvested locally. And when I go out to eat seafood, I ask where is this rockfish from? Where is this shrimp from? To get that information, and hopefully the folks serving you at the restaurant know that. If they don't, then that's sometimes a little bit of a red flag to me, and I might make a different choice. So just simply asking those questions can really help guide your choices. And there you can find information from the Marine Stewardship Council, some other places that can tell you about fisheries. But like I said, really anything that's caught here in Oregon or even on the West Coast, if you can get that information, that's I believe is your best choice.
Great, thanks. It is lunchtime, getting hungry, thinking about all the good things we could eat. I think we've got time for just a couple more questions. Are younger people interested in coming into the fishing industry, or is it like many other industries where older generations are aging out and there is no one to take their place?
It is at this moment pretty tough for younger people to get into the fishing industry. It can be expensive, and fishing is kind of a speculative job, and so you don't know from year to year what it might look like. So fishing is facing a bit of the same conundrum as other industries, with a lot of the fleet retiring out. There's a lot of work being done in this area, and a lot of brainstorming on what solutions could be so that we can help young fishermen and women get into the profession and make a good good job out of it. TNC in particular, we have been looking at, can we develop ways to identify what permits would be the best in a community to have in fishing, so that young people can use that information to guide where they put their resources, as well as working with some groups to look at, are there low-cost lending entities that could be put into place that could help facilitate younger fishermen coming into fisheries. The benefit there being younger fishermen are going to be more likely to use, electronic data collection tools. They may be more interested and able to participate in research, and we can get some good conservation gains out of younger folks coming in to the fishing. And at the same time, we need to not lose the knowledge and the expertise of the the folks that are leaving out of fisheries. So there's been work to just simply interview fishermen, such as we did with Bob Etter, to get, you know, what's their views, what have they seen, what's been their experiences, so to try to catalog that as well.
Great, thank you. I think that wraps up the questions we had from the group, so I'm going to hand it back to Jason.
Yeah, well, thanks everybody. If we missed your question, we'll do our best to get back to you. Before we wrap up today though, Gway and Gina, I want to ask you both one final question. What is your hope for this work, and where do you see it going in, say, the next 5 years?
So my hope, I'll focus on the fisheries and specifically, and my hope for the fishery work is that we really have some actions that are taken by the fishery managers and decision makers to put in some climate components into fisheries, to do that hard thinking and that hard looking at what do we need to do to our current processes and regulations and all of that, and have those in 5 years really in the best shape that we can to prepare for climate change, as well as our data collection system, so that we're able to collect the data and the information that we need to be able to determine if we need to make changes, how is our climate changing, how are the fisheries in real time operating.
Yeah, and I'll amplify that and agree with everything Gway said. I mean, you know, our oceans are still so unexplored, so much to learn, so many just basic science things we need to learn, like where are species going, what are they doing, where do they spawn? And so we're learning all the time. And so I'm hoping that in 5 years that, you know, we have the opportunity to have current stock assessments, real-time decision-making like Gway answered, that we have a better understanding of these climate impacts like ocean acidification, for example, and what they're going to do to our fisheries. And also that we can retain our healthy habitats that we have, whether they're in marine reserves or our kelp beds, so that our fisheries can continue to be resilient as these changes in the ocean occur. And so that we can do our best at managing the fisheries as we care for the ocean. And then also, you know, I just want to, as a reminder, just again, bring us back to that picture at the beginning of the slide that I wrote, that this is all connected. You know, Gway's marine fish rely on the estuaries as nursery habitats, and we have species like salmon that go up and down the rivers. And, you know, we're all working on other issues such as offshore energy and marine reserves. And, you know, there's so many opportunities for these issues to impact each other and amplify each other in positive ways and negative ways as well. And so if you're interested in learning about any of those topics or the work we're doing in these other areas, I hope you'll reach out to me or my team members, my colleagues like Jason Sievers and Jan on the phone. We'd love to have the opportunity to chat with you more.
Okay, thank you both. And thank you all for joining us today. As you can see, the work that Gway and Gina shared today requires long-term commitments from dedicated staff to become a reality. And of course, we couldn't do it without your support, and appreciate all you do to make this work possible. So thank you all. My colleagues